Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 42 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, for those of you who listened to the last episode, episode number 41 of Camera Position, you heard me talk a little bit about color photography, and that episode prompted me to go taking a look at some of the color photography that I have looked at over the years and found really intriguing. And what we'll talk about today is some more aspects of the way in which color works in photography and how we can use color to the best possible capability in our photographs. Now, before I get going with that, though, there was something I left out of the last episode of Camera Position. I intended to put it in there and just completely forgot. And you may have noticed, those of you who went to the cameraposition.com blog may have seen this on there, but there is an absolutely wonderful online application that Adobe, the makers of Photoshop, have put online, and it's called Kuler, or Kuler. I really don't know how to pronounce it. It's spelled by Adobe, Kuler, and it is an absolutely wonderful interactive application, free for use online, for exploring color, exploring ideas about color, and exploring how color works and creating your own combinations of color, and really helps teach you a great deal about color as well in terms of how color functions in the world. Now, I sort of figure that this color application online that Adobe has created is really more designed for designers than photographers, but I think there's a great deal that we can learn from the way Adobe's put this together. And just go there, take a look at it. I'll link it up on the cameraposition.com. It's also linked through the enhanced podcast here, if you're able to view that again through iTunes. And if you click on that link right here, you will find yourself transported to the color application. Take a look, poke around a little bit. You can register and save your own color combinations, and it's really a neat way to begin exploring color families and the ways in which we can manipulate and change color in value and saturation and so forth and so on. So take a look at it, and just curious to see what you think, because I think it's a pretty neat online application and really cool that Adobe has stuck that out there. It appears as though you need the most current Flash player. Of course, Adobe now owns all of that technology, so I think they're playing with ways in which they can show off how you can create applications in Flash. But never the mind, go take a look at Color, and it is color.adobe.com. Well, as I had mentioned earlier, my exploration of Pete Turner's photographs last time on Camera Position led me to take a look at other color photographers whose work I've admired, and those two that I've chosen to talk about today are William Eggleston and Stephen Shore. Now, Eggleston and Shore are probably considered two of the pioneers of fine art color photography. They are both in many ways, especially Eggleston, whose work you see here, credited with really introducing the world to the idea of color photography, and color photography as being a different sort of art form from monochrome black and white photography. And prior to the time that these guys came on the scene, generally speaking, collectors, museums, galleries didn't really look at color photography as being something that was worth really looking at. They saw it as a commercial endeavor, but they didn't see it as something that had its own intrinsic value. And Eggleston and Shore, especially Eggleston, really began to show people how color works. And Eggleston really had this amazing ability to find beauty and striking displays of color in regular, ordinary scenes in the world, and paying attention to the way in which color works throughout the image, and the idea of being able to take these ordinary scenes and have them take on some new significance when rich and complex color is introduced, as is in this particular image. And, you know, I think one of the interesting things to do with color photographs is to take and look at them in monochrome. Now, sometimes you can do this sort of by squinting when you're standing in front of a color photograph, say in a museum or a gallery, or it's in a page in a magazine. You kind of squint and it begins to reduce the value, or the color rather, of the image to simply values. But what I've done here is I've actually taken this William Eggleston photograph and converted it to grayscale. And what I was hoping to do here is explore the idea of how Eggleston's photographs use color as not just part of who we are, where we are, what we're looking at, but really use it as a way of manipulating our view of the space. Now, when we look at this photograph in monochrome, it simply becomes a woman sitting on a couch. But looking at it in color, and I'll sort of flop back and forth here between the two, what you get is this amazing sense of depth. There is this sense of depth to the combination of the wild color of this woman's dress and the equally wild color of the sofa. And then when you blend all of that together with the colors that are in the background of this sort of patio garden scene that Eggleston has shot the picture in, what we get is this riot of color, but color that produces a sense of depth and a sense of scale and a sense of proportion. I find it intriguing that when we view the image in monochrome, the woman really kind of looks like this little tiny midget woman sitting on this great big giant sofa, but in color, the depth of the scene is changed entirely, and I find that to be really an intriguing idea. Well, let's take a look at another William Eggleston photograph, another image here, this eerie green window. And, part of what I think is intriguing about Eggleston's photographs is the mundane quality of these images. The fact that the pictures are not seemingly of anything that is particularly intriguing. And I think that that's certainly part of the point. The normality of these subjects is, I think, rather deceptive because behind the image there's some sort of lurking danger, and I think that this dangerous quality is evident in this photograph of this green window, and the way that green not only is part of the window pane, but if you look closely you find little flecks of green reflected in this otherwise gray or neutral siding of the building that we're looking at. And certainly here the subject becomes this idea of green, which makes it all the more intriguing when we again reduce this image to a monochrome image, and suddenly the picture completely falls apart. We no longer really are intrigued by the idea of the window, and we're not interested particularly in what it is that's behind it. It's that eerie green color that makes the window seem to work or function as a subject in the photograph. So the idea of the picture is both about the sort of mundane quality of looking through this window, but also about the mysterious or almost sinister quality of this sort of acidy green color that Eggleston has found and used color photography's propensity for reproducing colors in a way that may be slightly different from the way human eyes see them, and often really is quite different from the way human eyes see them, to this amazing color. So the idea of the extraordinary, compelling, honest, beautiful, unsparing photographs being made with this luscious, rich sense of color that goes wall to wall, corner to corner in these pictures. Really remarkable in many ways. As we look at this last Eggleston picture that I have for you today, this wonderfully icy blue inside of the freezer, just so beautiful, and the complementary color relationships, we talked about that last time, fairly evident in the photograph. What I thought I'd do here is share with you a little snippet from an essay written by John Zarkowski. Zarkowski, of course, the great former curator of the Museum of Modern Art Photography department in New York City. And this essay was written in 1976 on the occasion of an exhibition of Eggleston's work that Zarkowski had arranged at MoMA. And the idea here of looking at color as being something different. So here's Zarkowski. For the photographer who demanded formal rigor from his pictures, Color was an enormous complication of a problem already cruelly difficult. And not merely a complication, for the new medium meant that the syntax the photographer had learned, the pattern of his educated intuitions, was perhaps worse than useless, for it led him toward the discovery of black and white photographs. Most serious photographers, after a period of frustrating experimentation, decided that since black and white had been good enough for David Octavius Hill, Brady, and Stieglitz, it was good enough for them. Professionals used color when they were paid to, during their very best, without quite knowing what they meant by that. In the past decade, a number of photographers have begun to work in color in a more confident, more natural, and yet more ambitious spirit, working not as though color were a separate issue, a problem to be solved in isolation, not thinking of color as photographers 70 years ago thought of composition, but rather as though the world itself existed in color, as though blue and the sky were the same thing. So there's John Zarkowski talking a little bit about color photography. That's from an essay from William Eggleston's Guide, the seminal book and exhibition produced in the mid-70s by Zarkowski and Eggleston. And I will link up a link to that entire essay, which is on the wonderful Masters of Photography website. And I'll link that both here in the Camera Position podcast as well as on cameraposition.com, so you can take a look at that. So let's move on here from William Eggleston to a contemporary photographer contemporary of Eggleston's, a guy named Stephen Shore. And Shore's photographs I wanted to look at both as a sort of companion piece to Eggleston, as well as being sort of in and of themselves really intriguing. And Shore and Eggleston are really inseparable from the recognition of color photography as a legitimate medium of artistic expression. And it's really important, I think, to look at Shore and not only his ordinary scenes of daily experience, yet through color and composition, the idea of how Shore transforms the mundane subjects into sort of thoughtfully meditative kinds of images. So here we have a Shore photograph of breakfast. It's a picture called Pancakes, and it's just the breakfast meal seen from above, not seen necessarily from the point of view of the eater of the breakfast, but rather as this sort of laid out kind of exploration of the way this looks. And it looks like we're in a diner somewhere with the carefully laid placemats and the little accoutrement of the salt and pepper and sugar and all of those kinds of things. But again, just like we did with Eggleston, let me take this picture for you and take it into grayscale and take a look at what happens. The picture, again, completely falls apart. It no longer is an intriguing picture of what we might expect to see, but rather becomes an exercise in just sort of shapes. Whereas with the color, what we begin to get is this reference of the red of the seat of the chair and that wonderful sort of orangey color of the melon and the brownness of the pancakes and the brownness of the table and that little blip of white milk, but also that little other blip up in the other corner, the right corner, top right corner of this remarkably beautiful little red blip that references back to the red seat of the chair, none of which we get in the black and white image. So the idea, again, of color being part of what Stephen Shore is doing here, of manipulating how we see the world and manipulating our eye through the space of the image. So let's take a look at another Stephen Shore photograph here. Shore, again, is one of the most important early color photographers, or early in terms of color photography being accepted into the mainstream of the fine art photo world. And part of that was that in 1971, at the tender age of 23, he became the first living photographer to have a one-person show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which is pretty remarkable. But where he also came to the fore was a 1982 book called Uncommon Places. And that book's really become a touchstone for a lot of photographers working in color and looking at how color can be used in its own way and how the medium of color photography could be taken as an art form in and of itself. And the idea of these pictures, in some ways, Stephen Shore's pictures are just remarkably documentary in some way, and yet they're not the documentary photographs of the type that we would normally think about seeing. But because they're not really produced according to any kind of set rules so that we can evaluate the subject at a later time, rather, he's looking at the idea of the way in which color shapes our world and how we perceive that world through color. So again, let's take a look at this same picture, this picture of this sort of scene, and take it and dissect it into black and white again, and take a look at what happens and how the depth of the scene completely falls apart. And that's because Shore has adroitly used color to manipulate the way in which we see the world. So what he's done here is he's taken this rather, mundane scene. Looks like either a restaurant or a motel or something, and he has changed our perception of it by including those little bags of onions in the foreground, this beautiful warm color that projects forward towards us, and sort of foiled us a little bit with the greens of, what is it, little ears of corn there in the foreground, but referenced both that same warm and cool color in the background of the building, the falls, and the red and this greenish, bluish aqua color that's back there. But also the brownish color of the truck that's on the right side of the photograph and the neutral gray of the truck that's on the left side of the photograph. So what we have is a picture that's really, kind of messy compositionally, but is brought together by the way in which Stephen Shore has used color in the image. Pretty remarkable thing, pretty remarkable idea of the way in which color could be used. And this idea of what have been called deadpan views, kind of mundane, boring, almost amateurish looking views of the world that are informed by a really remarkable use of color. So let's take a look at this one last picture here of Shore's. This beautiful red pickup truck with these greenish, yellowing palm fronds leaning down in front of it. And I'm going to share with you another little snippet, this time from Heinz Liesbach, who wrote an essay for Stephen Shore's Photographs 1973 to 1993 book. And here is a little snippet from Heinz Liesbach. Again, I'll link the entire essay both here in the podcast as well as on cameraposition.com. Shore's understanding of color is an unmistakable part of the peculiar, special quality that his pictures have. He shares a preference for the obvious, taking color and, as if it were saturating it with reality, with other artists belonging to the second generation of color photographers, which emerged at the beginning of the 1970s. Color no longer has a decorative status, but is conceived instead as a natural quality of everyday experience. Shore, however, manages above and beyond this to shape color into an entirely personal form of expression. Color is really a quality of the light for him. This subdues any potential tendency for the color to become harsh, and equally the light itself in this way acquires a special delicacy. The light is absorbed into the colored materiality of his objects and charges them with a restrained glow. The impression arises that color has been spiritualized. It constantly appears to be felt at every point, and this explains the sudden change often observed when the pictures are studied for a longer period, when the color becomes an independent construct, although without disturbing the unity of the image. Above all, however, the image's saturation with reality in Shore's work arises from the color. It is the color that provides a vital connection to the world. So there you have it, some ideas and thoughts about color from two of the pioneering color photographers out there, William Eggleston and Stephen Shore, and I hope you found something useful there, and I hope it also begins to help you think about the way in which color affects your world and might affect your photographs. So again, begin looking around for colors that might not have those kind of complementary color relationships that we looked at last time, but might have deep harmonies of color. And again, I really think if you take a look at this Adobe application, Kuler, that's color with a K, Kuler, color.adobe.com, you'll find that you'll begin to explore some relationships with color that you might not have thought about before. Even if you don't experiment with making your own color combinations with that application, take a look at some of the combinations that people have made. And I think it's also kind of fun to take a look at the kind of names that people have come up with for these color families. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. I hope to see you again soon on Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.
Photocastnetwork.com, your photography resource in the potosphere. Photocastnetwork.com